Blockchain Show is a podcast that demystifies cryptocurrencies and distributed ledger technology.
Hello and welcome back to the Blockchain Show. This is episode 218. Today on the show, we have Josh Rogers, CEO of Minterest. We recorded this episode back in November, I think, so sorry for not getting this out sooner, Josh. A little bit of the info will be kind of dated, so keep that in mind as far as their announcements. But we were joined by Ben Anderson, and this was a good long conversation. Here's Josh.
Hi, Nathan. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me on. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, well, it's our pleasure. I know that's definitely interested to learn about your background and how you came into be in this role. So, if you wouldn't mind telling us just a little bit about yourself and how you got there.
Yeah, no, sure. Look, it's a bit of a rollicking story. I got involved in startups about 25 years ago. I founded my first startup in 1996 in IP telcos. I got involved in running a public company in Australia, building out a content platform. We did the world's first monetization of content for Big Brother 2, so that's really going back in the day. And then really through the noughties got involved in a significant range of marketplaces, did a lot of work in Asia. And that's really been my love. I'm a founding shareholder of Freelancer, which has become the world's largest freelancing marketplace. And I'm a founding director and a mentor really for 7 years of Rebecca Campbell, who was the CEO of Hey You, which is Australia's largest cafe app. And, basically on the day that Rebecca started Hey You, she came and saw me, and I mentored her right through that until her exit, sort of 2017, 2018. I've been involved in, strategic kind of advisory roles, I suppose, for about 10 years, but at a very kind of hands-on level across a whole range of different kind of businesses, but I specialize really in what are called digital platforms. So I specialize in the architecture and the design of how you build companies where people interact online, and how do you do that in a way that, really builds out flourishing ecosystems. So basically all blockchain is digital platforms, and so the DNA of how these things work is fundamentally the same, but obviously blockchain brings a whole range of new exciting kind of opportunities. And I got involved in blockchain a few years ago, and I ended up coming out to Estonia. I'm Australian, and I now live in Estonia, and I don't live in Estonia for the beaches. I came and moved out here really because it's the capability of people that you can actually hire into a startup in Estonia. It's really quite extraordinary. And I didn't actually understand that until I came here. And your ability to hire world-class talent, out of the Ukraine and Belarus and, the old sort of Soviet bloc is really extraordinary. And that means that world-class people build world-class businesses. So, when I kind of had that insight and that realization, Estonia kind of came to the forefront for me. And I really designed Minterest in lockdown. I had the fortunate situation of doing lockdown in Zanzibar. I flew to Zanzibar for a few weeks holiday, and the government shut all the flights in and out for 4 months during that first lockdown. So, I can't really complain, but I also, what happened was that pretty shortly after wet season hit, so there's not much to do on an island where everything's shut and it's raining. And so that was really where Minterest got modeled out, and, that's kind of where the journey started. So once I got back into Europe and got back to Estonia, that's when Minterest really became born.
I thought I remembered something about Estonia where you can become a citizen of Estonia, and that's all on the blockchain. Or do you know anything about that? Or
it's e-residency. It's e-residency, which is where they have like a digital residency. Like they run, the entire nation is run on a digital framework in terms of how you interact with the government. So you can actually not ever visit Estonia, and you can become an e-resident of Estonia, which enables you to set up companies and operate within their legal framework. So you're not actually a citizen, but you have, and it's not even like a traditional residency in terms of visa rights, but it gives you certain operational legal rights. It enables you to interact basically with with the Estonian kind of legal and government framework. So, I mean, I am an EU resident, although, but that's just a natural part of the pathway in terms of getting residency status here.
So you're bringing 10 years of advisory roles to Minterest. What is Minterest? What's your role in Minterest, and what is Minterest?
Well, what Minterest does is, when you look at lending protocols, and there's a significant number of DeFi projects around. There's hundreds of them actually, but when you actually look at significant sector-leading lending protocols, there are very few. And the reason why is that, when you look at things like MakerDAO or Compound or Aave, each of those lending protocols, when they came out, brought with them very significant innovation, right? That really was breakthrough for each of them when they launched. And but the point is these sorts of lending protocols are difficult to design well, and they're very expensive to design well, and they really take significant resources. But, in looking at how these models were, and not just those three, but when you look at the DeFi lending market generally, it occurred to me that there was something else that could be done there. And really what Minterest does is that Minterest is about building out a fairer DeFi system where the actual value that is created by the protocol is actually created by its users. So when you look at any kind of lending protocol, but when you look at any platform, when you look at Facebook, for example, Facebook's entire value is actually created by its users. And the same with Google, same with Microsoft, but it's the same with, these lending protocols. So, what happens when you distribute the value that gets created by the protocol back to its general community of users? And in my view, that something quite revolutionary happens. And that is that, if you look at what happens in DeFi is that DeFi, it's very important in DeFi what's called liquidity mining for participants, right? So liquidity mining means that the protocol issues you their native token as an incentive, right, in order for you to participate. And that is a very, very significant benefit that comes with, DeFi protocols. But that kind of that token that they're emitting to you, that token that they're giving to you as a benefit or as an incentive to participate, isn't actually linked to the performance of the protocol. You might get voting rights or whatever, but the price of the actual token or the value of the token itself isn't linked to the protocol's performance. Like the two things are completely separate. And when you join those two things together, things get really exciting. So what Minterest does is it's the first protocol that captures all of the value of the protocol on chain. So how we do that is that all the interest fee income, all of the liquidation fee income, all of the flash loan fee income is fully automated by the protocol. And the protocol captures all of that value. And what it does is it goes out and each month it buys its own token back. It buys the MNT token back with that value that it's captured, with that fee income. And it then distributes those tokens back to its users. And it does that in return for their active participation in its governance. So it's a very, very powerful structure for ensuring that the protocol remains relevant and outcompetes sector peers, because what you're doing is that you're now linking the protocol's performance and its token value together. And that means that the protocol becomes an active buyer in the market for its own token, and then it distributes that token down into the community of users who participate in actually ensuring that it's able to continue functioning. And that's unique in that architecture. And then along the way, there's a couple of little things that are not a couple of little, quite significant things that are kind of breakthrough innovations. And one of those is an auto liquidation process, which is where the protocol undertakes all the liquidation process, and there's no third-party liquidator involved. And the reason that's important is because the protocol earns the fee income, and then that fee income then becomes for the benefit not of a select few people, but of the general community as a whole. That's probably a long answer to your question. I probably should have done the one-liner kind of elevator pitch, but
no, it's great. I like the long form conversation. It's great to sit back and listen from time to time. I don't think off the top of my head I can think of a DeFi protocol that's assets backed. So that's kind of a unique Yeah.
Well, what's actually happening is the longevity of a protocol, right? How do you remain relevant over the long term? Not over 6 months or 12 months, but how do you actually remain relevant for your users over the long term? How do you build that into the architecture? And in order to do that, what happens traditionally is that liquidity mining, so, like when protocols issue tokens to users to incentivize them to lend and borrow, the value of that liquidity mining decreases as the protocol gets better at doing its job. So if you think about how that works, you look at Compound, for example. Compound listed its token last May in 2020, and it came out at around about $180. Now, at the same time, Compound's liquidity, like supply of liquidity, was measured in the low hundreds of millions, $100 or $200 million. That was like May last year. Now, today the token price is less than double. It's about $320 but their supply of liquidity has gone from a couple of $100 million to $15 billion, and the amount of money that is actually being borrowed on the protocol is north of $5 billion, between $5 and $7 billion, depending on like what's going on in the market. So that's an extraordinary increase in the success of the protocol, but it's not reflected in liquidity mining. So each day the protocol issues the same number of tokens, and even though the protocol is doing its job more effectively and it's becoming more valuable for its community, the value of its tokens that it emits to people isn't going up. Now, that seems like a big flaw to me in terms of the design of these sorts of architectures. So with Minterest, the more borrowing activity that the protocol undertakes, the more successful that protocol is becoming and the more valuable it is for its users. And that means that it's also capturing more fee income. And that means it's going out there and it's buying its own token back, which obviously has a price impact because there obviously is a buyer in the market who otherwise wouldn't be there. And that means then that that price impact is increasing the value of liquidity mining to Minterest users. So even though I'm not trying to say the two are directly correlated, but what starts to happen is that the protocol starts to perform and become more valuable. Well, it's liquidity mining, the emissions that the tokens it emits to incentivize people to participate becomes more valuable. And that means it outcompetes. So the architecture is designed to outcompete the existing players by ensuring that the value of that liquidity mining becomes more valuable over time. And also it becomes an incentive structure, not just for people to be able to participate in governance, but to be able to participate in ways that are truly, truly valuable to the protocol. Because suddenly you've got this significant, financial incentive to actually drive behaviour, through the protocol to actually have the governance systems be extremely powerful. So you put those two things together, and you really do have something that's able to provide long-term value and benefit for people. And that's really at the heart of what Minterest is about.
That's really interesting. I had a quick question about the liquidity. How would somebody provide liquidity?
Well, pretty much the same way. So, we've just announced that Minterest is being launched on Moonbeam. So that means that we integrate beautifully with MetaMask. So even though we're a Polkadot network, and we receive all the benefits of Polkadot, low gas fees, extraordinary latency, unbelievable security. We also, because we're sitting on that Moonbeam parachain, we also benefit from the EVM integration, which means that traditional Ethereum users are able to use Minterest just like they would, any other kind of Ethereum-based lending protocol, but without all the gas costs and all the latency issues that come with the Ethereum network. So it's the same. People are able to supply to Minterest, via their traditional token assets, just like they do with any other kind of DeFi protocol.
And what assets and typical APY is Minterest offering right now?
Well, the protocol we're going through, we're about to go through what's known as a code freeze, which is what you do prior to audits. So we've got 3 major audits that are being undertaken in the fairly short near term into the new year, prior to what we're doing, which is called a private launch. So, these protocols, there's a bigger conversation here, but the protocol will actually go through two launch phases. So one launch phase will be what's called a private launch. And the private launch is tied closely with our investor raise. So we've just announced that we're doing a public token raise, which will definitely be in December. We're actually doing a pre-community raise at the end of November as part of that process. And what that means is that people who participate in that raise will receive an NFT. They'll receive a Minterest NFT. And the NFT has a lovely, beautiful image of it. The NFTs are based on the top 100 most influential people in blockchain. And so number one is Satoshi. Now, the thing about Minterest NFTs is they're not just a visual image. They come with very significant utility rights. So when you have an NFT, a Minterest NFT, what it does is it gives you a significant boost in emissions. And so everyone else has a certain rate of emissions that they receive. But if you have an NFT, you get a significant boost in those emissions for a fixed period of time, which can be up to years. So those NFTs could become extremely valuable to very significant liquidity providers. But how you receive those NFTs is actually through the actual token sale process that Minterest is undertaking, in December next month. No, the other thing the NFT does is it acts as a VIP card. So in the private launch, what you have in the private launch is that the protocol will launch, but it will be closed to the general public. And the only people who are able to participate in the protocol in that early phase will be people who have an NFT. And what that means which means that you've actually been an investor in the protocol prior to its launch. And the reason that's valuable is because there's a very limited number of people, right? You don't have a vast amount of liquidity being supplied to the protocol at that time. So it means that the value of tokens that you receive is extremely high. And that is deliberate because obviously we benefit from having a controlled environment where we get to run the protocol through its paces. The protocol will have been fully audited by that stage 3 times. But we get enormous value because we get to run the protocol in a private environment through its paces, and in return we want to be able to benefit our investors. So you would expect to see APYs, I suppose, in that environment that are very significant. Now the thing about these lending protocols like ourselves is that you'll have all the usual suspects, which is all the stable coins, Ethereum and Bitcoin. We're a Polkadot network, so we're definitely going to be seeking to have a token market for DOT. The same goes for Beam, for Moonbeam, who's our parachain partner, and others. And for various reasons, I think that there's going to be in the next 12 months a growing market in stable coins in non-US dollar denominated assets. So we can get into this conversation around how the US inflation numbers are really on their way, and the impact that will have on and the attraction that will have for things like Aussie dollar or yen or possibly even euro-based stablecoin assets. So that's something we're definitely looking at as well. But in terms of returns on the protocol, the protocol, the answer is it's very hard to tell somebody what the APY will be when that's actually determined by the protocol's operations and not by me. But as a kind of a headline, the protocol kind of goes through 3 phases. The first phase is that you've got this kind of low level of liquidity in the protocol as it's starting to launch, and that means that the value of the liquidity mining is extremely high. In previous protocols, you've seen APYs north of 1,000%, just simply because the sheer value of those tokens is extraordinary, because there's just not many people there, and that's the intention of that design. That design came through from Compound when it launched last May. And when I saw it, I loved it. And it's really become the kind of de rigueur or the kind of the general framework as to how DeFi protocols work. We're doing the same thing. But the key thing that we're doing that's differently is that the value the protocol captures gets spent on its own token. Now, in total, the protocol emits in total, 800,000 tokens a month. And, I mean, if you look at things like Compound or Arborate, which are generating hundreds of millions of dollars in value capture, not just their own fee structures, but also the fees that are earned by third-party liquidators, they're each earning very significant amounts of money. What happens when you apply that to a token in the token market? And when you have 800,000 tokens, if you're generating $100 million in revenue at some point as a protocol, and the protocol and Minterest is generating $100 million, well, it's generating $8 million a month. If you are emitting 800,000 tokens a month, and the token price is $10, and the protocol is spending $8 million a month on buying its own token back, it can buy back 100% of all the tokens that the protocol emits. That means it can buy back every single one at a price of $10. Well, that means that's not going to happen. So if the protocol was spending $8 million and the price was $40, it could buy 50% back. Well, I would argue that's not going to happen either. So I would suggest to you that if the protocol can get to that kind of a point, what this actual architecture does is it generates what's called a snowball effect or a flywheel effect. Supply has an impact on token price, and token price has an impact on supply, because token price drives the internal APY of the protocol through the value it creates in liquidity mining. So, any increase in the price of MNT has a big impact on the value of liquidity mining, which is what attracts people to come and participate in the protocol. And the more that it attracts them and they supply and the protocol undertakes more borrowing activity, the more income it captures, which means the more income it potentially spends on its own token, which makes attracting more liquidity easier. And so it becomes this flywheel effect, ostensibly, which is where liquidity that's being supplied to the protocol drives the token, and the token drives the supply of liquidity, and it becomes a snowball. And that's known as a flywheel effect. It's a very specific flywheel effect that only occurs in DeFi. And as far as we're aware, no one else has actually architected that out into their model. And it's at the very core of what Minterest does. And the reason why it's so valuable as well, it's not just about that APY piece. It's about how that then is transformative in the way that people participate in governance in the protocol, because people start to really care, and you end up with a very, very powerful community. What we have is we have a phenomenal team behind Minterest. It's a team of people who I'm extraordinarily proud to say that I lead. But, the intelligence of a crowd is far greater than ours. And when you get the sheer genius that does occur inside of these large kind of ecosystems, and you're able to have a incentive framework that can really distill that out powerfully and effectively, that's when things get really exciting. So that's the kind of the dual piece of that architecture. I think I've said the same thing twice, but so the answer is I can't tell you what the APY is, but it's designed to be more attractive than its sector peers.
Okay. I want to get back to the 100 NFTs. Is it 100 unique NFTs, or is it just 100 different?
No, we'll probably issue about 3,000 in total. But yeah, so this information's all coming out over the next week. But and probably the best way for people to actually keep up to date with that is to join us on Telegram and our announcements channel there, and Twitter, and also Discord if they want to deep dive and get into our questions on this. But the whole point about the NFTs is that there's a hierarchy. There's a different range of hierarchies, and those different range of hierarchies have different kinds of value. And then depending on how you participate in the token sale process, that'll determine the kind of NFT that each individual receives. But the intention is that the beautiful thing about an NFT is that it's tradable. So even if you're someone who buys Minterest tokens in the public sale, but you don't actually participate in lending protocols, well, you can sell your NFT to someone else who does. And so we expect that the value of those NFTs will be very noteworthy to people who are liquidity providers in protocols. like if you're a significant liquidity provider and you can earn a boost in emissions above what anyone else would get, then I imagine you'll do the mathematics and figure out what that is worth to you and step into the market if you wish to and pick one of those up. So the answer is that, again, it's difficult for us to actually tell you what they're worth, but the very valuable ones we imagine will be very valuable.
And then so your protocol will be doing loans. Is it also an exchange, like a decentralized exchange? Can you no? Okay, just
no. So we're a pure lending protocol. And again, what we're chasing, really our key market is people who are looking for stable return assets. So like I say, there are lots and lots of different DeFi protocols around, really catering to different niches. And Minterest is not really intended to be one of them. Minterest is intended to be a significant player in the DeFi sector that really does provide, security and confidence to people who are seeking, outperforming long-term yields. So it's not about generating, kind of crazy yields over the long term. It's about stable, outperforming yields. How do you have a yield in DeFi that you can just not think about, that just day in, day out is stable and consistent, but that also is always out competing with other sector players. So how do you and that's really where Minterest sits.
I hear a lot of talk about people taking out crypto loans in order to cut their tax liability down. Because if you take out a loan versus selling, you can kind of dodge. In America, it's pretty. We have very stringent tax laws. Are you familiar with how that would work? Using leveraging loans. Yeah.
Well, because just like any loan, you're incurring interest, and in incurring interest, that you're incurring an expense which you're able to expense. But crypto is such a volatile sector. I really think that most people who are participating in it probably aren't doing it for tax minimization. I think their attention is more on capital gain. The answer is at some point when you sell, whether you're borrowing against your assets now, at some point in the future when you do sell, you get to crystallize a capital gain and pay the government tax then. Like financial markets, obviously, around the world are very sophisticated, and crypto's really only been around for a pretty short period of time in terms of DeFi. But when you look at like the financial markets generally, you look at it from a big, like from a helicopter view. There's some interesting things to notice, which is that the financial markets have obviously built in fairly significant increases in inflation in the US, and they did that 12 months ago. And one of the ways that we know this is because, despite the fact that the world is going through some pretty brutal times and companies are doing it really tough because of the corona pandemic, equity markets in the US are booming. And equity markets generally are performing incredibly well, even though company reporting profits aren't necessarily reflecting that. Now, there are outliers and exceptions in technology, et cetera. But when you look at the equity markets around the world, they're performing incredibly strongly. And then when you look at residential housing markets in the Western world, they're also going, like for the last 12 months have been going through this extraordinary kind of increase in valuation. Australia's gone up 70% in the last 12 months in this residential home market. You're seeing similar kind of booms, in parts of Europe. You're seeing it in New Zealand. And one of the reasons why is the financial markets have built in inflation into the US. The United States has just spent $3 trillion pumping money into its money supply. And the total money supply of the US is about $7 trillion. So they've kind of increased it by 50%, say, in a year. Now, that must have a massive impact on inflation at some point. And that means that, how you make money in that situation is that you borrow, at low rates in the US, and you put those dollars into assets that are stable, that are in non-US dollars, where they are likely not to have as a higher inflation rate, because inflation erodes debt. If you're borrowing at 0.5% or 1% or 2% fixed interest in the US, and and inflation suddenly goes to 10%, well, you're making a lot of money because you've got a fixed payment return over the next 10 years, but inflation now is far greater, and it's actually eroding the amount of debt that you have each year because your ability to repay becomes easier because you've put that money into other assets that aren't in US dollars or aren't US dollar denominated. Now, one of the reasons why that matters is because one of the best deflationary assets around is crypto. So, we've seen this enormous boom in Bitcoin, and we're talking about this previously about, you're seeing things like ETFs there's a whole range of other investment assets. But what we're seeing is the start of a super cycle, in my view, because there's a range of key factors that are driving this. And so I don't think people are borrowing to reduce their personal tax. I think that they're probably borrowing in US dollars and buying into crypto to give themselves an inflation hedge.
I also kind of guessed that 10% inflation is what we're going to be looking at based off of things. You think that lasts for how long? 4 or 5 years?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a big impact, right? So, if you look at the smart money always figures this out first, and the smart money has seen currencies like the Australian and New Zealand dollar increase against the US dollar, specifically in the last 6 to 9 months. The same with the Canadian dollar. And this is in comparison with things like the euro and the US dollar, which is where there are inflationary concerns because of the pump priming that both of those two monetary policies have had in the last 12 months. So that really bodes well, though, for DeFi. It's kind of like a shot in the arm because, Bitcoin and Ethereum are incredible assets to hold in an inflationary environment. So, I think one of the reasons why people are borrowing in US dollars currently, or they were, is because the interest rates that they could borrow at on a fixed basis were incredibly low, and it gave them the ability to go and leverage assets. Seeing that the next 3 to 5 years are looking like it's going to be a high inflation period. More of that than actually, trying to offset that against their tax base. Sorry, that's a very long answer to your question. I really do apologize. And there's something else which is actually important specifically for crypto. And that is that people talk to me, say to me, look, when do you think that the boom is going to bust, right? And I look at them and say, well, when was the last time there was a tech crash, in traditional technologies businesses? And the answer is 2000, and I know because I was there. But the reason we haven't had a tech crash in 21 years is because the amount of value that's being built, and so, okay, there are times when the valuations of technology companies are, you could say, are too high, but it doesn't really matter because the amount of value that just gets built is like a steam train, and it just comes in and fills in the back. And so eventually what we thought was an overpriced tech company suddenly looks like it's really, we wish we'd bought it because it was really cheap. And what we're seeing in blockchain now is very much, for me, similar to the post-2000 period in technology stocks, which is where there's an enormous amount of value being created that wasn't previously. And that value is a freight train now. You've got these, significant, blockchain frameworks and DLTs like, Algorand, Solana, Polkadot's another one, that are just creating massive value. That value creation process underpins valuations. And as that value creation continues, the valuations sort of, start to match. And when you combine that with the inflationary cycle that we're seeing as well, and just given because the whole crypto sector is so influenced by Bitcoin and Ethereum, those two, both Bitcoin and Ethereum are so important in terms of how they drive sentiment. So, I think we're looking at I don't have a crystal ball. I certainly don't profess to claim that my view is how it's going to be, but, it looks like, I just think it's an incredibly exciting time.
It's hard to think of an asset that even come close to what sort of returns you're going to get than Bitcoin or Ethereum. Those two assets are where you want to be in this market, in my mind. One of the things you wanted to talk about was the Bitcoin ETF. You had some thoughts on that and what's driving it?
Yeah, well, I think that's part of the whole inflationary cycle as well. I mean, again, investment banks understand this stuff pretty quickly. That they're usually first movers, and they're having they're taking positions in advance of the rest of the market. And when you look at ETFs in Bitcoin, an ETF is a wonderful way for US investors specifically to hedge against inflation. And bang, here's the inflation numbers. We saw these incredible inflation numbers come out of the US just, literally in the last few weeks. But you've got, ETFs being designed to take that into account, probably half a year in advance. So, here's this Bitcoin ETF just in time to enable investors to participate in it, through a fairly traditional framework, and in doing so, give themselves an investment hedge against inflation. So I think the timing of the ETF is not coincidental. I think the other thing to understand is that how all these sorts of things work, like how all digital platforms work, and how all what are called DLTs, which are distributed ledger technologies. So Bitcoin is a ledger, Ethereum's a ledger. So is Solana, so is Polkadot, and the DLTs are the kind of the fancy word for saying that that they're a distributed or a distributed ledger framework. They're kind of like an app store, that app companies can come along and build on. So when you build an app store, really what you're building is a coding technology that allows people to build software which they can then distribute it through your app store. And DLTs are like that. And the key point here is that I've actually lost my point. But when you look at investing frameworks, and you've seen all these sorts of you're starting to see like this movement of what are called network effects. So network effects drive all these sorts of businesses, and they drive DLTs. And what a network effect is, and network effects are incredibly important. So when I'm designing these sorts of businesses, the only thing I care about is how you design a network effect into the actual architecture of the business. And what a network effect is like a positive network effect is the increased value that each person who joins the system provides to everybody else in the system, as well as those people who are about to join. And the best way to think about this is, why do people participate in Facebook? We don't participate in Facebook because we love its UI and we don't love its advertising. And for many people, I imagine they're not terribly aligned with Facebook values. The reason that we use Facebook is because everybody else uses Facebook. And so each person who joins Facebook, the value they bring to Facebook might be minuscule, but that value becomes impossible to overcome, right, once you start getting big numbers. Now, what's happening here, so when you think about this, the only reason the reason why there's no other version of the Facebook empire, to include Instagram, is because no one can overcome the fact that everybody can just join Facebook and talk to anybody that they want. And that's because of the extraordinary network effects. There's this snowball I was talking about. And the bigger the snowball gets, the bigger the snowball gets. And what's actually happening is that we're seeing that with Bitcoin and Ethereum, but Bitcoin specifically. So what's happening is that the more people who join Bitcoin, the more people who join Bitcoin. So the snowball's really starting to hit. And the thing to notice about that is that each person who joins Bitcoin isn't equal. The value of the people who are joining Bitcoin today are more valuable than they were 7 years ago. Because now you've got investment banks, you've got Teslas joining, you've got Visa card joining. So you're really starting to see this snowball effect go into overdrive. And the interesting thing about that snowball effect is that once it gets going powerfully, all it does is get bigger. So the EFTs that we're seeing is part of the snowball. You're going to start seeing much more kind of mainstream engagement with an asset like Bitcoin And if you go back 5 years ago and think about who was engaged in Bitcoin in 2016 compared to today, you can kind of get it. Well, imagine what 5 years from now looks like. So the snowball is rolling down the hill, and an ETF is like a little snowball that got attached to the big snowball. It's part of the actual Bitcoin snowball, and we're going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, a few things you were talking a little bit about the network effect, and it reminds me of Metcalfe's law, which is that the
yeah. Sorry, I didn't want to get. I kind of realized it's starting to go down too deep, and I thought I better not. I'll try and keep it simple.
And then one of the things that I've been in this space a little while, and the types of arguments people would have against Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, distributed ledger technologies or blockchains is they were scams or Ponzi schemes, and it seems like there's nobody willing to, or there's very few people willing to take those old arguments seriously anymore. Now the only thing to like the amount of energy that is being consumed by the network. You look at Tesla, they stopped accepting Bitcoin, citing the energy usage. And I look at the energy usage of a network that is maintaining value in a decentralized manner. And I think it's like such a paltry amount of energy usage. I don't understand why that argument has gained such strength. Do you know why that argument is having hold of people over like Elon Musk or?
Well, the first thing is that like carbon emissions is a big deal, right, in our world, and for very legitimate reasons. So when you look at how Bitcoin's blockchain works, every single transaction has to achieve, like, in order to achieve finality, has to be verified by the entire mining network. Well, that's a very significant. That takes an enormous amount of computing power. And one could argue that it's also no longer needed. Maybe if half the network was actually involved, that would be enough, because just the sheer number of participants. So, there are some hard decisions for the Bitcoin community to make around how it does make it more efficient. And obviously what you're looking at is new blockchain networks that very much take that into account. I mean, Polkadot's one of those because of the whole way that transaction finality occurs.
Did 100% proof of stake, or I don't know.
Yeah, no, exactly. So and also you batch transacting. If you're looking at things like parachains essentially do their own transacting on parachain, and then they batch through, pretty much in a rudimentary way. You could say it's a bit like a layer one on Ethereum, and they batch transactions through to Polkadot for finality. And that obviously keeps all the transacting on the main net, at a lower level. But there's a whole range of new architectures that are coming through that don't require the same amount of just sheer electricity that Bitcoin does, in order to operate. So I mean, look. The answer is that will Bitcoin be around in 20 years' time? If you ask me that question, the answer is I really don't know. When you look at the mining architecture and how the actual splitting occurs, there's a point where miners receive nothing. Now, what happens then? And so obviously, you can undertake a hard fork and you can do some adjustments, but that's a pretty significant thing to happen. And will other things come along that replace Bitcoin? And the answer, in my view, I think the likely answer is yes, but not anytime soon. But I can see a day, in the future, some point where Bitcoin, is a historical remnant, just simply because other things become more efficient. And as users move into Bitcoin, as the world moves into using Bitcoin and using blockchain generally, what that then does is educate users, and it means that they become easier. It becomes easier to actually have other forms of crypto adoption. So Bitcoin's a great way for people to it's a great gateway, right, or an onboarding gateway to introduce people into blockchain technology. But once they're there, it becomes much easier for them to move from, Bitcoin as an option to something else. And you can possibly see that at some point in the future, Bitcoin will get replaced by something. I'm not sure what that is. I don't necessarily think it'll be Ethereum. But, there's certainly some contenders out there that are looking that look like they could be pretty solid.
It definitely seems like Ethereum has a shot. I would say, as early as next year, middle of next year, it could, take the number one spot from Bitcoin. But
yeah, look, that's entirely possible. But yeah, the answer is that Bitcoin just is that it has an enormous amount of investor confidence, and people understand it, and it's it's like I say, it's kind of like it's kind of the brand name or the go-to brand name right now. But I can see in years to come that it'll get replaced by something else.
What besides Ethereum do you think would be the number one contender to take over the number one spot from Bitcoin? If there's anything out there, or is it just too hard to tell?
Okay, well, so this is really big brush, right? Broad brush, very high level, right? But I think that what's fascinating about Polkadot is when you look at Polkadot through a perspective of how it generates network effects. So the interesting thing about Polkadot, and I don't know Gavin Wood, I've never met him, but I deeply respect the guy. And the reason I do is because of I understand how Polkadot has been built to generate extraordinarily powerful network effects that are quite unique. When you look at things like Solana, and like Solana, by the way, is an extraordinary offering too. I'm no disrespect to Solana or any of these other players. But what Polkadot that does is something very, very different. It looks like it's not, but what they do is something profoundly different to what, say, Solana or Algorand do, or Cardano. And what Polkadot does is Polkadot is a mothership of blockchain. So what that means is that you've got this kind of network called Polkadot, but Josh Rogers can't participate. I can't interact with Polkadot directly. The only way I can is to interact with an app which is on a parachain, which is on Polkadot. So there's this kind of middle layer called a parachain. And you think, well, why would they do that? And the reason why is because those parachains today are things like EVM integrations like Moonbeam, and things like DeFi players like Akala that are bringing out stablecoin assets for the Polkadot network. But really, what those parachains are, so the parachain itself is like a gateway to Polkadot. It's like you've got an access card. So you can build your own blockchain network, and that blockchain network can integrate on Polkadot. And what happens is that Polkadot does all of the finality, all of your final transactions. But the reason why that you want to do that is because of what's called the inter-parachain messaging. So your ability to interact with other networks on Polkadot is incredibly seamless, and your ability to have asset transfer between those parachains is incredibly seamless. Now, when you start building blockchain networks that are on Polkadot, they're all going to end up with a user experience advantage over anybody else. So things like what are called mint and burn, which is where one in DeFi. This is just one example in DeFi, which is where a DeFi protocol has no wrapping. It only has native tokens, right, from networks that are on Polkadot's network. Because when someone actually, when someone is liquidated, right, and another person in a liquidation environment, another person is paid out, you actually burn the tokens of one chain, and you mint tokens of another. Now that can't happen currently in any way that I can see. Trying to get Cardano and Solana to give away their sovereignty of their circulating supply, I regard as almost impossible. But on Polkadot, that can happen because Polkadot is the one ring that rules them all. And the reason why that kind of interactivity is so valuable is the more networks that join Polkadot, the more valuable that becomes to people who are on that network. So it becomes a very, very powerful network effect. Now, what that means is that you start small. You start with small kind of blockchain networks, and then you start getting bigger. And eventually the big ones have to join because the benefits of being there are so substantial that if they're not, then the user experience that people have on their network is less than what it is on Polkadot. So this is I totally admit this is painting this from a very positive picture, But if Polkadot gets that right, and so far what I'm seeing is pretty amazing. But if they get that right over the next long term, like over the next 5 years or so, what it means is the major blockchain networks will have to join Polkadot. And it certainly is not inconceivable to me that Ethereum becomes a parachain on Polkadot. Now, most people would say to me, Josh, you're crazy. But, I've been doing this for 25 years. And that is very, very much how the architecture is built. So a lot of things have to go right. And I completely confess that, it might be too bullish, but I don't believe so at all. And it's like saying, well, there's no way that Facebook would take out and own all of social media in the world, or that Amazon would ever be, a monopolist, right, of online shopping. Well, yes, because they got the architecture right, and then they ran the model.
It's definitely like a winner-take-all type of world where, as you mentioned, doing Metcalfe's law that just runs away with everything.
So yeah, look. So anyway, does that answer your question? The answer is that no other network that I can see has built that kind of long-term framework where the network effects outcompete everyone else, and that's what really impressed me about Polkadot. It always has. It's pretty obvious. This is what I do, and it was pretty obvious to me when I looked at it and go, oh, that's awesome. And like I say, lots of things have to happen, but it's certainly not inconceivable to me at all that there comes a point where Ethereum has to become a parachain on Polkadot. And, that is not inconceivable at all. So that's because the architecture is designed that way, and they're building a snowball. They've got to get the snowball going. There's a lot of things they have to do right, like I said, but if they get that snowball going, wow, it'll become a monopoly. It'll become monopolistic in terms of its architecture and blockchain. And that's why people ask me, what is Polkadot? The answer is it's the mothership of blockchain. It's designed to be the mothership of blockchain. And no one else I've seen has kind of thought that through. So anyway, that's a fresh viewpoint.
People are pretty bad at figuring out what's going to happen next.
Oh, listen, I make no guarantees in my judgment. Please don't go and buy Polkadot based on my assessment. But that's like I say, I've seen this a lot over the last sort of. I mean, look, network effects got defined in 2003. Got defined by two French economists called Rocher and Tirole. And Tirole actually won the Nobel Prize for Economics, I think, in 2013, or 2014, based on partly his ability or his work in distinguishing network effects and digital platform architecture. But, he's an amazing economist just generally. But so this sort of stuff has only been around for 18 years at all. And really, people have only started really at a general level, have only really started kind of talking about network effects really in the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, I was lucky enough that research material from those guys, plus two other guys called Parker and Van Alstyne, who are academics out of Harvard and Boston, or published out of Harvard, but from Boston in the UK. That stuff came across my desk in 2005, 2006, and I remember it took my breath away when I first saw these academic papers. And academia is very, very good at distinguishing what happened yesterday. Academia is terrible at telling you how to do it tomorrow, but they're very, very good at telling you how it went yesterday. And when you find good academia, like great academics who publish breathtaking work, the value of it's extraordinary. And this stuff came across my desk in 2005, 2006, and I remember when I first read it, and I thought, wow, it's like kind of, like network marketing for the internet. And then as I dug into it and learned more about it, I realized, no, it's something else far more powerful. So everything is kind of, the thing about network effects is that for most people it's very, very hard thing to explain, because it's like gravity. It's such a minuscule force. And for startups, network effects are like, they're the startup equivalent of dark matter. Right, they're almost invisible and incredibly difficult to measure, yet they hold everything together, and without them, nothing would exist. And but actually being able to be aware of actually the individual benefit that each person makes, that is so minuscule, it's almost impossible to conceive. But when that turns into 1 million people or 2 million people or 1 billion people, the value that is building, those interactions building, becomes so massive that nothing else can compete with it. And I think that the winners in blockchain are going to be those people who get that stuff right.
So, kind of talked a little bit about why you like Polkadot. Why did you choose Moonbeam out of the different parachains you could have chose to work with?
Well, this really the answer is there's A-Star and Moonbeam, and both are excellent. We're close to both. My team knows Sota at A-Star as well. I mean, Sota is the old Plasm. But it really just came down to, there's a whole range of kind of conversations, negotiations to get involved in to make that happen. And there's just a lot about that. There are a lot of synergies between our team and Moonbeam's. It wasn't these are sort of relationships that we've been developing for literally about a year. And so we were close to both Moonbeam and different members of A-Star as well. And we've been developing those relationships over time, but it really came down to a few things. And one of them was that we did a fairly significant strategic workshop internally to really nail down the assessment of which way we wanted to go. And there were just some things about Moonbeam that just tipped it that way. And we're delighted about the decision. I really find Moonbeam's team to be excellent. Derek Yu, who's their CEO, I think is just world class. He really does know his stuff. Very impressive. Team of people. And again, like they've got something like 90 or 100 other blockchain businesses that have actually that are moving on to Moonbeam. So they're launching with a very significant community. And I think what they've done in terms of the way they've built out their community on Moon River, on Kasama, is impressive, and we expect even more from more of that to occur on Moonbeam. So, but the answer was both of those platforms are great, certainly, but just it always comes down to from a strategic decision, which option you believe is best suited for your business. And it just, in terms of Minterest, we just felt that Moonbeam was the better choice.
So would you consider Polkadot like fourth generation blockchain technology? Like Bitcoin would be first generation, where, a single coin does a single thing. And then you had, the second generation is trying to add different sort of functionality. So, you can do like a naming system coin or something like that and put them together. And then third generation is like Ethereum, where you can kind of do anything, Turing complete. So anything that can be computed can be done. And then kind of like adding the scaling that Polkadot provides with the different parachains.
The answer is I think that you look at these proof of stake systems, you're looking at things like Solana as a network is very impressive. In terms of the way that they built that out. They've built that out on Rust as well, which is actually the coding technology that Polkadot uses. So you've got these coding technologies. Polkadot is built out on a completely different technology than Ethereum is. It's built out on what's known as Substrate, which is not a different coding language. It's an entirely different technology stack, and it is just phenomenal. Now, we built Minterest out in Substrate, like literally complete. So we've literally built 2 protocols out. And we then did a pivot in our technology stack and changed to a Solidity framework, which doesn't have necessarily the same technical advantages. But what it does have is it has the community. There's just so many people that are already, using Ethereum today, and it gave us enormous flexibility in terms of how we launched. So if for whatever reason Polkadot said, look, we're going to take another 12 months launching because, whatever reason, we would be able to move to something else. We would have flexibility of choice, and one of the key things is that when you, obviously I'm pretty pro on Polkadot generally, but I didn't want to necessarily, neither did the team, And again, we went through a big strategic workshop on this to really determine it. But we really wanted to provide ourselves with flexibility. We didn't want to get locked into a position where our ability to launch was being determined by a technology partner like Polkadot, and being on Solidity and being on a smart contracting framework enabled that. So the moment we went to a smart contracting framework, then we want to be on Polkadot, but we now need to be on a parachain that gives us that kind of EVM capability. And that, and hence the reason that we're on Moonbeam. But fourth generation, the answer is look, these new blockchain framework, these new blockchain chains and networks are built for very significant flexibility, and they've got different. They're just much more flexible than Ethereum 2.0, like Ethereum. But Ethereum 2.0 is coming out. I don't have deep insight into it. I certainly wouldn't pretend to. And I certainly couldn't say yay or nay about what that looks like. I mean, and please, I do want to put a big disclaimer in here. The answer is I don't know what Ethereum 2.0 is doing in detail. I do understand it at a high level. But it surprises me that Ethereum built out an upgrade rather than actually starting from scratch. That did surprise me. I mean, I can tell you very significant numbers of mega projects where they've done the same thing, and the legacy that you still have. There are elements of your business or your code base or your chain that are legacy, and that you would not have made if you started from scratch. And it surprised me that Ethereum didn't go and just build 2.0 as a clean shell from scratch and then just transition the community across. So the answer is I don't know what 2.0 looks like in detail. But by the way, some of the things they've done as an initial step into that have been really positive. But when you're looking at something like Polkadot, it's being built. It's a Ferrari in the space. It really is. Without the maintenance, it really is a high performance machine, and especially how the architecture is designed to build these very powerful network effects around blockchain networks themselves. It's a magnet. It's a giant magnet that sucks in other blockchain networks because of the sheer benefit that those blockchain networks get by interacting with other blockchain networks that are on Polkadot. And that's not going to happen in 5 minutes. It's going to take time. But once that snowball gets going, it's going to be pretty interesting.
It's definitely one to watch.
Yeah, like it's just completely different to everything else. And that's what I love about it. In a way, and I don't wish to be derogatory in any way, but you can kind of say that Solana is an improved version of Ethereum, and Polkadot is not. It is something completely different. It's designed to be like the mothership, right, of these other networks. And it's probably, Gavin Wood might shoot me, but it's kind of the one ring to rule them all, and the darkness bind them. It really is a very impressive design. And like I say, you've got to get that architecture right, but there's a lot of other stuff you've got to do first. And there's a long way for them to go. But everything I'm seeing at this point is very impressive and is done inside of that understanding. I'm so impressed by the intelligence of its architectural design. I really am. And by the way, I don't want to sound arrogant, but I don't get impressed often at the level that I see like this with Polkadot. It really is. It's impressive.
There's very few. Well, there's a lot of very impressive people in the blockchain space, but Gavin Wood, certainly one of them. I remember reading the yellow paper that he wrote for Ethereum, and just the mind that he has is really impressive, and it shows with what he's done with Polkadot. Even like their test chain, Kusama is worth a lot. Their test chain, so
Well, yeah. Well, Kasama will probably end up being an ecosystem in its own right. And like Kasama didn't suit Minterest because we're a high value lending protocol, and test chains aren't necessarily where people want to trust their money. And so Polkadot's really the production environment, you could say, which is why we're there. But the other thing about Polkadot that is not kind of obvious is that if you're a parachain on Polkadot, you pay no transaction fees. You pay zero. So if you're Moonbeam's only expense for being on Polkadot is that they need to stake DOT tokens for a period of time at auction. Now, that expense is very high if you have to go and buy those tokens or rent those tokens. But if you own those tokens, if you've got the capacity to write the check for $100 to $400 million in order to get yourself a parachain, you have zero transaction costs. Now, that's a very there's an opportunity cost. I understand that, but that's a very powerful advantage. So that's something fairly unique that people haven't actually kind of thought through, because who's going to spend what startup's going to spend $100 million? What app is going to spend $100 million on a parachain? Well, the answer is not very many. And the only kind of networks that capture enough value to justify the expense of being on Polkadot are these DLT frameworks. It's these sovereign chain distributed ledger technologies. They're the guys who capture the most value inside a blockchain. And for them, the expense of being on Polkadot is worth it because of the value that they derive from being there. And I don't think that is fully understood by the market. I don't think they kind of get that yet. And so that, yeah, I'm sounding like a Polkadot and Kevin Wood fanboy, but that's one of the reasons why it's impressed me, because that's very cleverly mapped out. At the end of the day, there's an extraordinary set of values and principles inside the Minterest team. It really is what binds the group of people. One of the key things is that we're wanting to undertake a fundraising process for the protocol in a way that is fair and as equitable as possible for all of its participants. And that's not an easy thing to do. And the entire design of Next Level is inside of making it interesting and exciting in a new way. So it's not just about, buying tokens. It's also about, hey, what is this NFT? What kind of value can I ascribe to that? But also, how do we enable our community, who are active supporters of the Minterest protocol? How do we enable them to gain allocation in a way that doesn't happen through things like IDOs, which is where there's a very it's quite restrictive. People aren't able to get allocation. People have the experience of being frustrated and disappointed. And, we really wanted to ensure that our community didn't have that experience. So how do you do this in a way that's refreshing, and it really supports and empower people? And we're really proud of how we've done that, And so it really, the community sale event, which occurs prior to Next Level, means that anyone who wants to participate can. And we guarantee you allocation, and we guarantee you that your allocation will be at the lowest average price of the LVP, of the Next Level token sale. We guarantee it. Done. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to freak out. You're not going to get ripped off. There's no funny business. We've done an enormous amount of modeling, and we've had quants working on this for some time. We understand. We've designed it so it can't be gamified, and people can't come in and try and play silly games in order to wreck it for everybody. There's an enormous amount of thinking that's been put into that, and we're really proud of how it's done. And the reason why is, again, is that when you do liquidity bootstrapping pools, when you do LPPs as a fundraising mechanism, they tend to suit larger investors more. And so larger investors tend to be able to, they understand the mechanics of it. They understand how to operate within those sorts of, mechanisms. And so we wanted to have a pre-sale or a community sale prior to that, which was designed for smaller investors that gave them confidence, not just that they're able to get allocation and they don't have to worry about that, but they're also not going to get ripped off. So we're really proud of that, and the whole team is, and we're very, very proud of how we put that together. And like I say, it's all, and we've done that and built that inside of a framework of acknowledging not just the top 100 in 2021, but really those people who have contributed to blockchain since its inception. And by the way, there's a couple of surprising candidates in there whether we think will make it interesting to talk about. And we're still contemplating. I can't say we're going to do it, but we're thinking about actually publishing how we actually made that assessment. So every single person in that top 100, and we went down through to about the top 50. Every single person, there were 6 key criteria that determined that result. They were all individually weighted, and then we actually had full community buy-in from people who were technical through to people who were NFT collectors through to social media influencers, like a really significant portfolio of different types of participants in blockchain got involved in kind of, putting that list together. And I imagine people will come to us and say, hey, you missed this person, you forgot about that person. And we do want that feedback. And, and that's part of kind of building that out.
It'll be interesting to see who made the list and who didn't.
Well, I'm not there, I can tell you.
Me neither. I'm sure of it. But I don't know. There's obviously.
I can tell you that Gavin Woods is there, and he's in the top 10.
He is there. He's in the top 10.
Oh, of course, he's in the top 10. But what's interesting is the top 10. People that are known. Someone who was the CTO of Ethereum and is now building out Polkadot. That is, one of the key things that was very significant in the weighting was how long you had been involved in the blockchain community. So, there are people who have made a significant contribution, but kind of have been around for a short period of time. And that was significant whether or not they made this kind of top 100 list. And there are people who are very significant in the NFT space that probably didn't make it in because they just haven't been a participant for as long. Now, when you look at, that's kind of interesting, right? Because, I can probably share with you. In fact, I'll probably get shot for sharing it, but I probably will share. And then, in the top 100, Peter Schiff made it.
That's terrible. Peter Schiff is in there? No.
Yeah, you know why? Because Peter's been calling Bitcoin oversold since it was $15, right? But he's actually built a career doing it. He's actually built a career doing it, and his meme factor, which is one of the criteria, is off the chart, right? And there's all these things where he scored incredibly low, right? Like the lowest he could possibly score, but there are areas where he scored incredibly high. And one of the areas that he scored incredibly high is he's been around since day dot. He has just not gone away. And by the way, he wasn't, I can say he only just made it in. But it really surprised us because in the way that the weighting was done, this is somebody who, he's kind of been a bear on Bitcoin since, I don't know, it's $15, but he's still there, and it really made us laugh because, anyway, I'll probably
must have highly scored being a reverse indicator of things,
No. Well, see, when you look at, Peter's been involved in the space as a kind of an influencer or as a voice since 2011, and has been consistent, and he's kind of made this career, you could say, by being being a doomsdayist for blockchain. But guess what? He, it really surprised us. So I think he came to the 100. But
so that's a funny one.
Yeah, but there's a couple of outliers that came in because of things that because huge in the factor is how long have people been participating? And when you consider, we've got people who've been contributing to the space for a really, really long time. I mean, they make a legitimate difference. And by the way, Peter is somebody who actually has, who has kind of made a significant difference, even if it's not in the way that you would expect. So it's kind of, it was really interesting. I mean, he scored, I can't remember the exact metrics. I won't rattle them off now. I'll get shot even for talking about this with you. I know that my CMO will totally nail me, but it was really interesting. There were a couple of people who scored incredibly low in terms of the value that they actually added in terms of technology or their their kind of credibility in the sector, but they scored extremely high in their longevity and their kind of what we call meme or X factor, and he was one of those. So we kind of laughed and we actually thought, should he be there? But that's actually how it panned out.
Any other interests and surprises you want to share and get shot for?
Oh, that's the best one. That's there's people like John McAfee, who obviously is no longer around and who was significant in the last boom. I mean, McAfee was.
Is he dead or just in jail?
No, he committed suicide.
Okay.
In jail. Yeah, no. I think he was put in jail by the Spanish authorities, and they were going to extradite him to the United States, and he took his own life. But he, which in itself is sad, but when you think back to 2017, McAfee was kind of the Elon Musk of that cycle. Elon Musk is like, the cycle is bigger this time. It's more mature. It's certainly far beyond kind of just sort of, kind of promoting, kind of nothing tokens, which is what McAfee was huge at. He was the altcoin promoter of his time. But, Elon Musk is the kind of the Dogecoin promoter of ours. And, while the cycle's gotten bigger and the participants are kind of, have changed, he was really the Elon Musk of his time. So I think he's in the top 100. There are some people who nearly made it in who surprised us as well. Like there are people there's these new kind of music influencers who have huge communities who have only been around for 5 minutes, so they didn't get into our list because their contribution is very short lived. But you've got people like like Gene Simmons from
Yes.
Oh my God, I can't believe it. Scared from Kiss. You've got Deadmau5 and Snoop Dogg and these sorts of guys that are music celebrities or music rock and roll stars and DJs. But they did, while they might be making inroads into the social media or influencer space, they've only been around for 5 minutes. So from our perspective, that didn't kind of get them in. But we're looking at actually publishing the actual results as to how we actually did it. So we haven't made that decision, but I think that we think it'll be more interesting, make it more interesting for people. And like I say, it's not Josh's top 100. It really was, we really wanted it to be legitimate and valuable and also to be, it's intended to be honouring and acknowledging of people. So, that was the reason we put that together.
Interesting. We've been talking a little bit. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about for Minterest that I didn't cover that you kind of wanted to go over, or?
Well, look, I can talk about Minterest all night, but your listeners will go to sleep.
I don't know. Our listeners are interested in possibly taking out loans when that's available, or investing in your company. Investing in your company, that's not the right term, but
yeah. Well, look, I mean, the way to do that is obviously all of that's pretty current right now. So please come and have a look at us. Our white paper should have been out. It's been held back by me. I suffered man flu for about 10 days. And for our female listeners, man flu is not it's not coronavirus, but it's worse because obviously women do suffer from the flu, but man flu is completely what men get, which is where somewhere between Ebola and the Black Plague. So I went down for 10 days and thought I was going to die. So I was I'm a terrible sook and a whinger, and my partner was gorgeous and that she had to look after me. But so that kind of delayed the white paper. So that'll probably come out, either the end of this week or early next week. And the other thing as well is that Discord's always great. I mean, we're building out Discord now. We've had our attention on Telegram. We're going to now have our attention on Twitter. We're kind of 2 weeks into a 6-week kind of marketing cycle, but Discord's always a valuable place to go to kind of, deep dive. So you'll start to see some deep dive sort of content coming out in Discord.
Okay. But Telegram was the main spot before, and you're moving a little bit more towards Discord.
Oh, yeah. You start with Telegram just because, in crypto, everyone's on Telegram. And that's just the first point of engagement. But really where we, the kind of backwards and forwards engagements on Twitter, but also, Discord's where we get to deep dive. You can't deep dive on Twitter, obviously. And Telegram just becomes kind of a stream of consciousness rather than, the ability to actually create, meaningful, deeper conversations. And Discord's great for that. So that's getting our attention now.
So do all the MNT tokens give you voting rights and how the protocol is handled as well? Is it like a DAO or is it not? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
They do. So what happens is that users have to. So the key point is that it's pretty simple. At a starting level, when you supply tokens to the protocol, you receive emissions from the protocol, right? For lenders and borrowers, just like you would do with other lending protocols. But what happens is that you have to elect. Essentially, you have to select and choose to participate in the protocol's governance. So you might have these tokens, but until you actually push a button and say, listen, I want to participate in governance, you don't. Now, once you participate in governance, in return for doing so, you receive tokens in the form of the buyback. You become a participant in the buyback. So you actually have to elect to participate. And in that election, we then incentivize you to participate by actually distributing the protocol's buyback to you. And at least once every 12 months, you need to vote on or delegate your vote on a protocol proposal. So everyone who is in the governance and receiving the protocol's buyback needs to participate in governance at least once in a 12-month period. And if you don't, we'll boot you out, and you'll stop participating in the buyback rights. And the reason for that is because that becomes a powerful structure, right? For distilling the genius that you actually, I'm a huge believer in the intelligence of crowds, and one of the problems with crowds is that there's a lot of chaos and a lot of white noise, and they can be incredibly resource intensive to manage. But there's genius in crowds too. And so, we're wanting to build out a governance structure that enables people who want to participate more meaningfully over time to be able to do that as well, but to do it in a way where the Minterest protocols we're really getting insight and genius from people, that becomes a competitive advantage. So that's all part of that play. But the buyback means the moment you participate in governance, you are participating also in the protocol's buyback.
Yeah. All right. This is. Am I missing anything else, or I know there's. I can talk for hours.
Probably the last thing. Okay. Well, probably the last thing I want to talk about, if I can, is and it's probably the thing I'm most proud of is actually our team. One of the things that we as a group, as a company, and I particularly put a lot of attention on is how you build out an internal culture that empowers people, and how do you actually build out a culture where people flourish and really inside of a strong desire to excel in delivering something really at the next level. And I'm really very, very proud of the group of people who are behind the protocol. We really have a team of people that I believe are truly world class. I've certainly never had the privilege of working with people this good ever, and it really is quite amazing. Our COO is Kin Chaturvedi, Kin's the ex-CBDO of Tomo Chain, which is Vietnam's largest blockchain project. He's got like 5 years in running gaming houses in India, and the guy is just phenomenal. And then our CMO Alex is just is just unbelievable, actually. And, Alex runs a marketing team of about 8 people, permanent, we've got internal content writers and tech writers, social media, very, very, there's project management even within that team, given its scale and size. And again, runs a very, very sophisticated, very, very well thought out, marketing strategy, which is inherent in a business like that. And then the technology team is very significant. I think we're at a full-time team currently of about 20 people. And Dennis Romanovsky, who's our CTO, Dennis joined. He was literally the first person to join Minterest after me. And Dennis, his ability to build out a very, very, powerful, effective team has just been a delight to be a part of. It really is amazing when you see people flourish, doing stuff that they just love doing. And, the level of understanding that occurs inside of our dev team is really phenomenal, like just world class. And then there's internal mathematics, and we've got PhDs in maths on the team, and data science. There's a range of different analytics as well. So that's all part and parcel of it. And when we talk about the Minterest protocol, the Minterest protocol gets built by a group of people, who are, in my view, that's the real excellence. Our job is to deliver something that is seamless and beautiful and outperforms and gives people a new experience. But the dedication that goes in behind that is really remarkable. And David Esler, who's our product manager, David's ex-Cardano, and there's some really exciting stuff that's coming out in terms of a whole kind of unique user dashboard that provides data analysis and deep insights to enable people to really understand their risk profile and what they're doing, and do that in a way that doesn't require them spending 3 years at university to understand the intricacies of it. So, I suppose I did want to mention that because I get the privilege of sitting here and talking about this, but it doesn't get built by me. It gets built by a team of people, and it's a team that I'm very proud to be able to say that I lead. And so that's been, and that's a big part of it. I think we want to actually, we'll probably share some of that as we move forward as to how that kind of thinking is designed. How do you design this sort of culture, and how do you create an environment, where people actually do flourish, right? And inside of, and it's an environment that's still delivery focused, very much. Like inside of our team, there's always a spotlight. Like there are no passengers. Like every single person is exposed in terms of their ability to deliver or not. But that is not in any way disempowering. It's actually for people who love, delivering. That's where they flourish. Because they get to actually, get to be connected to the value that they create for others. And so I'm really proud about that. And in many ways, that's the most valuable part of my job. People ask me what my job is, and my job is to have other people win. And so I spend a lot of my time on that. And funnily enough, some of the answers as to how that happens are often counterintuitive. And because it's not necessarily about table tennis tables and slippery dips in your workspace or everyone kind of clapping hands and being happy. It's about how do you empower people. And I'm very proud to say that, it really is a phenomenal group of people. And again, that's sort of information and detail that we do want to share, and we will share, with the public over the kind of coming weeks and months.
And how do you go about empowering this team to reach their full potential?
Well, there's a podcast in this one. Well, this is work I've been doing for about 10 years. There's a lot of learning. And the first thing to understand is that one of the best places you learn is you get it wrong, and I have definitely done that in the past. But the quick answer is there's three key things that a workplace must have in order for it to deliver outstanding results. And the first one is safety. And safety, I'm not talking about workplace safety where you're not going to fall over a ladder or something. Safety is a distinction that most people don't have their attention on. But safety drives all human behaviour. All human behaviour is driven by our desire to move to safety. It's what drives culture in any business. And the reason that culture exists, culture is the tacit agreement of behaviours and ways of being, or ways of behaviours and ways that are okay to be, that are undiscussed. They're agreed and undiscussed. And the reason that people behave that way is because behaving that way is safe for them. And you can have cultures that are toxic and horrible, but people, there's an agreement within that culture that is an appropriate way to behave. But it just doesn't necessarily empower people. And if you want to empower people, people have to be safe. And what safe means is that it's okay for you to be you. The last thing we want to do in Minterest is hire a whole lot of people who are like Josh. And so what we have is a group of people who are individual, and where it's completely safe for them to be themselves. And the moment that you are that way, something else happens, and that is that when you're safe, safety enables people to collaborate. It enables collaboration. And that's very, very important in technology companies. And the other thing that whole process does is it creates belonging. It creates a sense of team. So it's no longer just about me. It starts to become very powerfully about us. And, what's quite extraordinary is that some of our team members have had some pretty tough times in the last 12 months where, close relatives have died, or, they've caught corona, or, different events. And the degree to which our team supports those people independently, nothing to do with me, independently, just naturally, is really an expression of that belonging, of that, hey, we belong. And yet I can belong without having to be a certain kind of way. I can just be me. And being me is safe, and yet I can still belong. And so the thing that belonging does is it really binds strong teams. So belonging is very, very important, in that people feel that they are part of something. And then the last thing that people don't seem to put much attention on is purpose. What is the value of your participation? So when people are connected to that, the way that they participate in the business has an impact not just on the business but on others outside of it, that there's something bigger than just making money, that's when things get really interesting. And the reason why that's important is because it's not just highly motivating, it does something that people don't naturally see. It has people be smarter for longer. When you are powerfully connected to value and your own personal purpose, and that the value that you provide is purposeful, right? That's massively incentivizing, but it's also inspiring. But the key thing about inspiring is it enables you to retain cognition. It enables you to retain focus because you're inspired. Like if you think about the alternative, when you're not inspired about something, when you're like, oh God, right? You are so not interested, right, in being sharp, in being attentive, in being like on top of the game, just naturally, because you're bored and you don't want to be there. But when the opposite occurs, you're incentivized naturally. You're not incentivized by money. You're incentivized by the purpose of your work and the value that you contribute to the other people inside of that organization. And what that does is it drives and lifts cognition. People become smarter, and they become smarter for longer because they're just naturally incentivized. And the value that provides inside of a business in startups is phenomenal. And I don't understand why other CEOs, or lots of other CEOs, don't have their attention on it, because that's actually, like for me, that's how I do my job. The measure of my job is, is the capability that exists inside of my team is not just that they're clever. You've got to be clever to be on our team, no problem. You've got to be hardworking. You've got to, there's all these things. But really what takes it to the next level is you get all of that, and then you empower this person. You have them in an environment where they love coming to work because they can just be themselves. They feel a part of a big group of other people, that are forwarding and doing something that they believe is making a profound difference, not just to each other, but to others, that's when miracles happen. And there's been a lot of, I suppose you could say I've brought, 25 years of experience into Minterest. And, and the thing I'm most proud of is that, So it's not a normal kind of, often CEOs want to talk about kind of achievements in terms of, technical achievements, but all of those things happen. All of those things are done by a group of people. They're done by a team. So you get the right people in with the right principles and the right values, and then you build out an empowering culture that gives people purpose. Where they love what they do and they love who they do it with. Then all I have to do is get the hell out of the way. So yeah. Anyway, there you go.
It was safety, purpose, and belonging, huh?
Safety, belonging, and purpose. Yeah, and they're all inherent, right? The reason those three things matter is because they're inherent. They're inherent in the human experience, right? I mean, when you are unsafe, right, the whole way you behave is profoundly different than when you are, right? And the whole way that you interact with people, and this is, and so much of this is even in the subtlety. You can have workplaces where everyone pretends that it's safe, but it's not really authentically safe. And the answer is there's no perfection in this either, right? I'm always looking at the gap. I'm always looking at what's missing, and it's never, and you never get everything right. And I think that one of the reasons why one of the things that people ask me is, culture in a business is 100% the job of a CEO. No one else. It's 100% that. So everything that goes on in the business from a cultural perspective, the CEO is profoundly responsible for. It doesn't mean they did it all, but it all comes from leadership. And so if culture is not flourishing in some way, or in some way the team is like repressed, or is not operating at their optimum, then the answer to that problem is really simple, because you just go in the bathroom and you look in the mirror. It always comes from in Minterest, everything that happens in the business in terms of our culture comes from me, good or bad. And so the only place to address it is if there's something that's not working, and that does happen. I certainly don't profess perfection. Then, the only place for me to look about that is in the bathroom mirror, because it's always coming from me, because that's my job. My job is to provide leadership and to lead a team of people and to be responsible for that. It doesn't mean that all the culture is derived from me. It's not like I'm some sort of divine being, but it's just simply the nature of what I do as a leader of a business, that the permissions that other people have as to how of what is okay in terms of how people behave and interact with each other, that benchmark is always measured against me. So if I don't behave in a way that is consistent with what we say we're about, then it won't happen. It's impossible, because I'm being a hypocrite. So one of the great things I love about startups is that they're the ultimate self-development course. I tell this to all the guys I mentor, and what happens is, and I'm always mentoring 3 or 4 startups, which I love doing, by the way. And I don't do it for money. I do it because it's just a way of paying it forward, and I thoroughly enjoy it. But I always say to people I'm mentoring, look, it's the ultimate self-development course. You constantly got to be looking at your own self, because everything that is in the way of the business is coming from you. You're always in the way, and your job is to get yourself out of the way and break through your own personal limitations that are causing that result. And they come back to me and they say, like 6 months later, they'll come back and say, "Oh my God, I so get what you're saying," right? And then they'll come back a year later and go, 6 months ago, I thought I knew what you were talking about, but now I know what you're talking about. And they'll come back a year later and they'll go, "A year ago, I thought I knew what you were talking about, but now I know what you're talking about." And that just goes on and on, and it's simply the case as well for me. One of the things I love about Minterest is it's constantly having me learn and having me be challenged and having me personally develop my own self. Because if I don't, then how can I ask my team to be the same? And that's one of the things I love about it, and I love about startups generally. They're constantly having you, walk into the bathroom and look in the mirror. And from my perspective, that's a really valuable thing in life, right? And it has you be humble, and you've got to have the courage to tell the truth about your own bullshit. And I reckon that's a good thing. I certainly, I can get as full of it as anyone else I know. So checking in on my own rubbish and seeing how I'm in the way, I just find incredibly valuable. And as far as I'm concerned, if you're not willing to do that and you're in the game of startups, you're really like you're putting yourself in a really tough place because you're always in the way.
It's been a very insightful conversation. We've touched on a lot of different topics today.
We really have, haven't we? Anyway, so there you go, guys. Sorry. I imagine normally you ask more questions. You don't have someone just ramble like I have, and I really apologize.
No, it's great. It makes it easy when somebody just has interest in the things to say, and I can just let them talk. I get in the way if I ask questions. If I have to lead the conversation too much. So it's good that I can just enjoy the conversation.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, it sounds like it was less of a conversation and more of a diatribe, but thank you for being so generous about it. But look, I hope that gives you some insight, not just into Minterest, but the kind of group of people who are behind it and why we're here.
We got you down for Polkadot will overtake Bitcoin and Ethereum in this year, in the next month and a half.
I didn't say this year.
Month and a half. That's what I've got you down for.
No, it's a really interesting thing that when you play the long term on Polkadot and you look at how it generates network effects, it's really, it's unusual that people would normally see it at this stage, but it's what I do, and I understand how you architect these things. And when I first saw this, I went, oh wow, that's really clever. So yeah, but look, guys, thank you so much. Thank you for letting me prattle on, and you've been very generous with me. And like I say, I suppose as a quick close to everybody, look, please do come and join us on Telegram. Do join us and reach out on Twitter and on Discord. We'd love to have you be part of our community and enjoy the Minterest joining.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Josh.
Thanks, Ben.